What I wanted to talk about first is the issue I have with gender. So, I'm a very left-leaning person, both politically and economically, but also in a woke sense. I've been called very woke, and I'm okay with identifying as woke. Although sometimes I do use that one friend that's too woke picture. I have an issue with how society perceives gender. However, this is not in the sense that this is any transphobic argument or pro-transgenderism, which is a terrible word to describe someone who just wants to be themselves, argument. None of the sorts. And when I say society, actually, I should use a different term, because I'm not talking about society as a whole and how gender is perceived in society when it comes to the collective humanity, but rather the single individual. So I would say that society is not the perfect term to use here. I'm very woke. I've always supported all my trans friends, not friends, whatever. But I have a quite different opinion on gender than most woke people. So, first, I've been looking up what gender is for a while now. And mostly the answer is a set of social and cultural norms or expectations that are typically associated or seen to have a connection with a determined sex. Which is already quite confusing, but many people, accept that as a definition of gender. But I think, honestly, that gender is not a real thing. We have made it up. And by that, I don't mean that we have made up the concept of being transgender or non-binary or whatever another gender you are. I mean the concept of gender itself. So also cisgender people are not actually cisgender because gender is not a real thing. I'm a cisgender girl. I'm a girl. My body is female and I feel like I'm a girl. But when I say that I feel like I'm a girl, what does that mean? When I say I'm a girl, I just feel like I am more similar to girls than I am to men. However, I'm not. I'm not the best person to talk about this sort of topic because of the fact that I'm so similar to boys rather than girls. But still, this makes sense. Maybe that makes me a good example, actually. But let's leave that for later because I don't want to get confused. So, what do I mean when I say that I'm a female? As a gender, not as a sex. To me, it doesn't feel anything. So let's give a little bit of backstory when it comes to myself. So, I've always been a girl. I've always wanted to be a girl, that's it. But I've always been very masculine. I always try to pitch up my voice because my natural voice is very, very low. Also have a very masculine body. I don't want to talk about it a lot, and I will spare the more embarrassing elements of this sort of thing. But for example, I have really large hands. Very large hands. Larger than many adult men I've encountered in my life, and I'm not even an adult yet. Large, veiny, hairy hands that make me look terrifying. And also I'm very tall. I have a very defined jawline, a small chest, and a lot of body hair. So this clearly makes me look very masculine. Also I have, wide shoulders and a large waist, and I don't look like a woman at all. I'm this tall girl, naturally, but it is very masculine. A very masculine person. So physically, although I am definitely, utterly a female, I am very masculine. But what about my brain? When I was little, I have always been very masculine, as in I have always hung out with boys until only recently, actually, in my life. During elementary school, and also maybe a while during middle school as well, yes. I've always found myself hanging out with boys much more than I did with girls. In elementary school, I basically almost only talked to boys, except for one girl who then left. I haven't seen her again after elementary school. So why was that? I didn't have the same interests as girls. I really liked role playing. I always had a great fantasy. I need to create stories. That's why I write novels and plays and all, and songs and all that. I always wanted to create stories, but no girl wanted to role play. We did great role plays, actually. We played in the playground, but we were pretending. And it's actually crazy that some boys actually agree to do that sort of shit with me. Oops, I didn't mean to swear. I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to do that. So all of the girls played together and learned, for example, how to do gymnastic, how to roll over, jump, roll again, that sort of stuff. I've never learned how to do that, and this has actually, been a struggle, because then during PE, when I was older, when we were requested to, when I got older, when we were requested to do this sort of stuff, I was the only one who wasn't able to, and that made me feel this difference that I have with other girls. And sometimes I'm very timid, but sometimes when I get comfortable, I'm very loud also about for example, about very dirty jokes or sexual fantasies that I like to express with friends, which is not a bad thing in my opinion, but it's always very much associated with males. I always see people saying, men are freakier than women, and it gets me a little bit, feeling bad, because hey, I'm freaky too. I'm not saying that women are as sexually violent as men, because sadly, I hold a bit of animosity towards men when it comes to this sort of topic, but that's not the topic of today. I'm sorry to any man watching. I don't hate you per se. And, but this sort of thing has always been associated with men. And also what else? I've never been interested in sports, but when I was little, for example, I played some video games. And no girl really did that. I played card games like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! And I used to teach my friends how to play the Pokemon trading card game, and actually learn from me when I was really little. And always been a pretty decent teacher, actually, when it came to games. So, enough examples, I think. So you see, I was very masculine. Also, when it comes to personality, I'm still pretty masculine, but it's just more clear when we are kids, because when we are kids, we are very conforming to a single stereotype. When we grow up, we have our own personalities. We're very unique. Everyone is very unique. But when we are kids, we're just like kid 1, kid 2, kid 3. Okay. And all of this separated into two genders. Female children have 2 or 3 personalities. Male children have 2 or 3 personalities. But I somehow was more aligned with one of the male personalities than I was with any of the female personalities. So clearly I was masculine. Regardless of my appearance, I also used to have very short hair when I was younger. When I was tiny. But I also was psychologically masculine. But I didn't think that I was a boy. I always thought that I was a girl, and I was completely fine with the fact that I was a girl. So there is no idea of being transgender, for example, even though personally I don't see being transgender as any sort of a problem. It's none of my business. I support transgender people with all my heart and their rights. But I didn't feel that. I always felt like I was a girl. But there was some pain, especially more recently in my life, because when I was little I didn't really realize that as much, caused by the fact that I was not like other girls. Not in a pick-me way, but in a real way that made me suffer. Because the fact that I was so aligned with masculinity, both physically and mentally, now that I'm a little bit older, I'm more concerned about my physical masculinity than I am about my psychological masculinity, but it is there, especially when I was younger. When I thought about this sort of masculinity, I got very insecure, because goddammit, I'm not like the other people of my gender, and I still feel that way. It still hurts me, even though I have, realized that I think in the sort of way that I will explain in this video about gender. And it didn't make me feel good at all. It doesn't make me feel good at all today as well. And I was just thinking, why does it have to be this way? I just don't belong. I felt like I didn't belong. I think that's one of the main feelings that I had. And so I was just thinking, what does it really mean to be a girl? Like, why do people think that this is a real thing? What does that mean for someone to think about being a girl? I don't want to be a man. I don't want to be masculine, that's what I mean. Not because I personally am so attached to my gender, but rather because I think it would make me, for example, less attractive to men. A straight man would not date a woman that looks and acts like a man, usually. And the fact that my girl community would not be as accepting because I'm not so feminine. What does it mean to be feminine? I always thought about that. What do I wish I had? I wish that I was quiet. I wish that I was proper, that I had a good, for example, handwriting, which I have slowly developed through my life, but only in the latest year has it become decent. Before I had a terrible handwriting, and every girl had a very beautiful one. And I wish I was good at gymnastics, and I was smart and tender and did what girls do, whatever that is. And of course, I wish that physically I was, better, more beautiful, more girly. With, thinner shoulders, less hair, smaller hands, better looking face, a smaller nose. But when I think about tenderness, I shouldn't swear as much. I shouldn't be so sexually open, for example. Not physically, but, with my words. I think, why are these sort of things feminine? Naturally, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that society teaches little girls to be proper, or this sort of thing.